A single phone call in the dead of night. A routine patrol with no expected action. 4-2 German pilots. May 16th, 1943, was just another day of war, until they received orders that would send them into the heart of an unimaginable catastrophe. Everyone thinks they know the story of the Dam Busters, the heroic British raid. But this is the other side of the story. What do you do when your duty is to defend the enemy causing the devastation? Get ready for a story not combat, but of conscience, a mission that would redefine victory for two men forever. Before we witness their impossible choice, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more untold, inspiring stories like this directly to you. The calm before. The evening of May 16th, 1943, settled over the Luftwaffe airfield near Dortmund like a gentle blanket. The setting sun painted the hangars in long, lazy shadows. For Lieutenant Klaus Richter, 28, the fading light signaled the end of another monotonous day. He leaned against the cool fuselage of his Messerschmitt Bf-110 night fighter, the scent of oil, grass, and damp earth filling the air. It was a familiar, almost peaceful aroma, so starkly different from the acrid smell of cordite and fear he associated with combat. His radar operator, Under Officer Eric Bauer, 24, approached, two steaming mugs of ersatz coffee in hand. "Another quiet night, Klaus?" Eric asked, handing one mug over. His boyish face, still too young for the weariness war imposed, was hopeful. "Intel says nothing." "Silent night," Klaus replied, his voice a low rumble. He was a veteran of the Channel clashes, his eyes holding a depth of experience Eric admired and feared in equal measure. "We'll do our patrol, watch the river glitter, and be back for a real breakfast." He offered a rare, tired smile. Theirs was a partnership built on silent understanding. Klaus, the steady hand on the stick. Eric, the keen eyes in the dark, guiding them through the void with his newfangled radar set. The scene was deceptively domestic. A mechanic hummed a folk tune. Somewhere, a radio played a static-filled jazz melody, a forbidden American tune someone risked punishment to enjoy. This was the war's mundane rhythm. Long stretches of boredom punctuated by bursts of sheer terror. For Klaus, these quiet moments were what he fought for. Not for glory, not for fatherland's abstract ideals, but for the simple, profound right to a peaceful evening. He thought of his wife, Lena, in their small apartment in Freiburg, far from the industrial heartland. He pictured her reading by lamplight, and the image was a talisman against the darkness he knew lurked just beyond the horizon. Their mission briefing had been succinct. A standard Helen Nackjagd, illuminated night fight patrol. They were to orbit a designated sector over the Ruhr Valley, the mighty industrial cradle of Germany. If the British came, they would be guided into the attack path by searchlights from the ground. It was a defensive, reactive role. The real threat, command assured them, was elsewhere. As they performed their final pre-flight checks, the plane felt like a second skin. Eric fussed over his Liechtenstein radar array, the delicate antennas looking like awkward antlers on the aircraft's nose. "All systems green, Klaus. We are the eyes of the night," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. Klaus just nodded, running a hand along the wing. This machine was their shield, their weapon, their home. In its cockpit, they were masters of their tiny slice of sky. But tonight, the sky would not be theirs to master. It would be a theater of someone else's devastating ingenuity. The calm was an illusion, and it was about to be shattered by a sound none of them had ever heard before. The low, humming approach of Lancaster bombers flying impossibly low, and the whine of a weapon not yet understood. A whisper in the dark. The inky blackness of the German countryside unfolded beneath them, a tapestry of muted shadows where only the silver thread of the Mohn River caught the moonlight. Inside the cockpit of their Messerschmitt, the world was reduced to the dim glow of instruments, the steady drone of the engines and the crackle of static in their headphones. For 2 hours, it was the same mesmerizing, uneventful monotony. "See anything, Bauer?" Klaus's voice was calm, routine. "Nothing but ghosts and ground clutter," Eric replied, his face pressed against the rubber eyepiece of his radar scope. The greenish glow painted his features, a mass of concentration. "It's a quiet night. Perhaps they went somewhere else." It was then that the whisper came. Faint at first, almost lost in the radio hiss. A voice from ground control, tense and higher pitched than usual. Achtung, Adler 2. Unconfirmed reports of low-level aircraft approaching Sector Dora 7. Extremely low altitude. Investigate. Klaus straightened in his seat. Low level? That doesn't make sense. Lancasters usually came high, a vast armada raining death from above the flak fields. Flying low was suicidal, risking hills, towers, and power lines. Bauer, sweep again. Look for something they wouldn't do. Eric adjusted his set, filtering out the electronic noise. Minutes ticked by, then a faint, fleeting blip. It was there for a second, then vanished, swallowed by the ground return. Klaus, I have something, but it's on the deck. It's right on the river. It can't be. Before Klaus could respond, the radio crackled to life again, this time with new, urgent energy. It was a flak commander at the Moan Dam itself. His voice was not tense. It was frantic, laced with confusion that bordered on panic. They're attacking the dam. The dam itself. They are not bombers. They are... I don't know what they are doing. They are skipping stones on the water. Skipping stones? The message was nonsensical. A prank? A miscommunication? But the terror in the man's voice was unmistakably real. A cold knot tightened in Klaus's stomach. This was not part of the war he knew. Command to Adler 2. Vector immediately to the Moan Reservoir. Maximum speed. Engage all contacts. Vernichten sie essa. Destroy them. The order was a hammer blow. Klaus shoved the throttles forward, the twin engines roaring in response as the nose dropped. The peaceful patrol was over. Eric guided him, his voice now tight with stress. Heading 085. 10 kilometers. I have multiple contacts now. They are everywhere around the dam, and something is happening on the water. They broke through a thin layer of cloud, and the scene below unfolded like a waking nightmare. The Moan Dam was illuminated in a crazy crosshatch of searchlights. The frantic fingers of light danced, not across the sky, but down, skimming the surface of the black reservoir. And on that surface, they caught the silhouettes of immense four-engine Lancaster bombers, flying so low their wingtips seemed to kiss the waves. One was pulling up, its vast shape lumbering away from the dam wall, and on the water, a single, perfect, expanding circle of ripples glinted in the light. A profound, eerie silence hung over the scene for a heartbeat. Then, the water beneath the dam's wall seemed to bulge. It wasn't an explosion from above. It was a cataclysm from within. A colossal jet of water and white mist erupted from the base of the massive structure, followed by a deep, groaning roar that shook their aircraft through the air itself. The sound was not of bombs. It was of the earth breaking its bonds. Klaus and Eric could only watch Mouse Agape as a crack webbed his way up the mighty concrete face, and the entire central section of the dam began to slump forward in slow, terrible majesty. The British hadn't just bombed a target. They had broken a valley. The third wave. The world had dissolved into a roaring, chaotic madness. Where the mighty Moan Dam had stood for decades, there was now a gaping, monstrous mouth vomiting an unimaginable torrent of water into the valley below. The sound was a physical force, a deep-throated, continuous thunder that drowned out the scream of their own engines. Searchlights, now useless, swung wildly across the sky, illuminating the apocalyptic scene below. Mein Gott? Eric whispered into the intercom, the words swallowed by the noise. He was no longer a radar operator. He was a horrified spectator to the unleashing of biblical fury. Klaus's training and instinct kicked in, a thin veneer of control over sheer disbelief. Bauer, contacts, were the bombers. His voice was sharp, a command to pull them both back from the brink of shock. Eric tore his eyes from the devastation and forced himself back to the radar scope. The green screen was a mess of chaotic returns, chunks of concrete, geysers of spray, and the overwhelming echo of the tidal wave itself. But there, amidst the chaos, were the sharp, clean blips of the attackers. 3 Lancasters, bearing 190, low level, heading south-southwest. They're running. The order from command screamed in their headphones. distorted by static and the panic of the controller. Adler 2. All units. Pursue and destroy. They must not escape. Klaus banked the Messerschmitt hard, the G-force pressing them into their seats. They dove out of the orbit, leaving the dying dam behind them, its death throes lighting up the sky. The hunt was on. The anger was there, a hot, righteous fury at this violation, at this unseen, terrifying new weapon. These weren't soldiers. They were sorcerers who had summoned an elemental force. They closed the distance with terrifying speed. The Lancaster was a giant, a whale against their shark, but it was slow and heavy, skimming the treetops. In minutes, they were on it. Klaus's finger hovered over the cannon trigger. The silhouette filled his windscreen. This was the moment. This was revenge for the dam, for the valley, for the war. Klaus, wait. Eric's voice came through, strained, different. He wasn't looking at his scope. He was staring out the canopy. Down into the valley the Lancaster was now fleeing over. Klaus glanced down. The wave had already traveled miles. It was no longer a wall of water, but a fast-moving flood, a dark, churning serpent of destruction devouring the landscape. In its path, he saw the tiny, twinkling lights of villages, Lena's lamplight multiplied by 1,000, being snuffed out one by one. He saw the faint outlines of houses, bridges, farms being consumed. This wasn't a military target. This was a homeland. The Lancaster crew down there, they were just men who had done their duty with insane bravery, just as he was trying to do his. To shoot them down now would not unbreak the dam. It would not save a single soul in the drowning valley below. It would only add more death to the deluge. The radio crackled. Adler 2, report status. Have you engaged? Eric looked at Klaus, his young face a mask of conflict in the dashboard lights. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The sheer horror had forged a silent, terrible understanding. Klaus's hand, poised over the trigger, trembled. The order was clear. His duty was clear. But down below was the true face of the enemy they were now fighting. Not the men in the bomber, but the water. The unimaginable scale of the civilian catastrophe unfolding beneath them redefined everything. With a gut-wrenching curse that was part anguish, part liberation, he pulled his hand away from the trigger and shoved the control stick, banking their fighter away from the Lancaster's tail. We lost him in the clutter, Klaus said into his microphone, his voice hollow, betraying the lie. The target is gone. The silence from ground control was heavier than any reprimand. They had chosen, not between Germany and Britain, but between destruction and a sliver of shared humanity. They turned back toward the crumbling dam, not as hunters, but as witnesses. The first light, they circled until their fuel gauges dipped into the red, orbiting the widening maw of the broken dam. The initial thunder had subsided into a vast, relentless hiss, the sound of an entire lake emptying itself into the world. The searchlights had died, their power source doubtless claimed by the water. The only illumination now came from the moon, casting a cold, silver light on the scene of ruin, making it look both beautiful and utterly dead. The radio had fallen silent. The frantic voices of command had moved on, diverting other fighters, trying to coordinate a response to a disaster for which there was no playbook. Klaus and Eric were alone with what they had seen and what they had not done. The flight back to the airfield was conducted in a silence heavier than any they had ever shared. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a routine patrol. It was the numb, deafening silence that follows a trauma. Words were useless. How could they describe the feeling of watching an entire valley drown? How could they articulate the moral calculus that had led them to let the bomber go? The evidence of their failure was literally written across the landscape, a scar they could see even from miles away. As they approached the airfield, the first hints of dawn were smudging the eastern horizon with pale gray and pink. The world was waking up to a new day, utterly unaware that the world had changed in the night. They landed with a bump, the wheels hitting the tarmac with a jarring normalcy. The mechanics approached, but their usual banter died on their lips when they saw the expressions of the two men climbing out of the cockpit. Klaus's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He clenched them into fists, hiding them in his pockets. Eric simply stood by the wing, staring blankly at the hangar door. Their commanding officer, Major Strauss, a stern man with neatly trimmed mustache and eyes that had seen too much, marched toward them. "Richter, Bauer, report. We heard the dam was hit. Did you make contact?" Klaus looked at the major, then past him, to where the sun was beginning to touch the tops of the distant trees. He saw not beauty, but the exact same light glinting on the water that was, at this very moment, swallowing homes and lives 50 miles away. "We made contact, a major," Klaus said, his voice rough, "empty. We saw it happen." "And—" Strauss pressed, his eyes narrowing. "The enemy aircraft?" Eric looked at Klaus, then back at the major. He found a voice he didn't know he had, a voice that was steady and clear. "We engaged, a major, but in the chaos, the water, the searchlights, we lost them." He held the major's gaze, and in that moment, the lie was sealed. It was their first act of defiance, not against their country, but against the senseless adding of more death to an ocean of it. The major studied them for a long moment. He saw the hollow shock in their eyes, the dusting of reservoir spray still on the canopy. He saw men who had seen something beyond the scope of war. He simply nodded a curt, weary motion. "Get debriefed, then get some rest." As the major walked away, the first real sound of the new day reached them. It wasn't from the airfield. It was a distant, faint, rising sound carried on the wind from the east. It was the sound of sirens. Not air raid sirens, but emergency sirens, the desperate cry of towns and villages downstream trying to warn their people of what was coming. A sound that was hours too late. Klaus and Eric didn't move toward the debriefing room. They walked slowly to the edge of the airfield, toward a small hill that overlooked the rolling countryside. They stood side by side, watching the sun rise over Germany that was forever changed. The war had always been about factories and fuel and steel. Now it was about water. It was about the absolute, terrifying power of nature unleashed by man. They had gone up as soldiers tasked with defense. They had come down as something else entirely. Men who had seen the abyss and had chosen, in one fleeting moment, not to plunge deeper into it. The victory they had been taught to seek had evaporated like mist over a reservoir. In its place was a grim, sobering understanding and a resilience not of nation, but of human spirit. They had survived the night, but they would forever carry the sound of the water,